In the spring of 1817, as England struggled to steady itself after the long and punishing wars, Lady Eleanor Ashcombe moved through her quiet estate with the air of a woman who had learned to expect little from the world. She was nearly 30, and society had already pronounced its judgment with merciless efficiency, whispering that she had lingered too long on the marriage market, that her beauty, once praised in drawing-rooms, had dimmed like a candle abandoned in daylight. Yet Eleanor's reflection in the mirror betrayed nothing of these whispers. Her face remained composed, her gaze steady, though her heart bore the faint bruises of every comment overheard at long-ago assemblies. She had grown used to silence as both shield and companion, for it demanded nothing from her and revealed nothing in return. Inside the manor, her mother's fragile voice often called from upstairs rooms, and Eleanor answered with unwavering patience, concealing the ache of exhaustion that settled between her ribs like a permanent lodger. She knew the estate teetered on the edge of debt, though she hid the truth to spare her mother worry. Marriage, once a possible lifeline, now appeared an unreachable shore, and she had long since stopped entertaining the fantasy of a man who might look at her with something warmer than polite indifference. The village saw her as dutiful. Society saw her as finished. Eleanor saw herself simply as necessary, holding together the unraveling threads of a life she had never expected to lead. Thus, when her aunt's letter arrived with a flourish of wax and admonishment, urging Eleanor to return to London for the early assemblies, she felt a reluctant stirring of obligation. Her aunt believed that a renewed presence in society, however belated, might salvage prospects that had once seemed promising. Eleanor doubted it, yet she understood the necessity of maintaining influence in the very circles that dismissed her. Accepting the invitation demanded careful persuasion of her mother, who feared the journey would reopen old wounds, but Eleanor insisted with a gentle firmness. She knew the world judged her for aging without marriage. She refused to let it judge her for surrendering entirely. London, when she arrived, seemed louder and brighter than she remembered, as though the city had grown restless during her years away. Carriages rattled along crowded streets, and the fashionable world surged in vibrant clusters outside milliners' shops and assembly halls. Every corner brimmed with gossip, and every whisper carried the power to elevate or destroy reputations with alarming speed. Eleanor stepped into her aunt's townhouse with a composed smile, bracing herself for the inevitable assessments in her aunt's eyes. But her aunt received her warmly, praising her poise and insisting that the right evening might shift every perception that had calcified around her name. Eleanor nodded, though inwardly she feared that the world she returned to had already forgotten her. As Eleanor reacclimated to the social rhythm, another figure made his return to London under vastly different circumstances. Sebastian Hawke, the Duke of Ravenshire, arrived without ceremony, though his name alone stirred a ripple of speculation across the city. He had spent years abroad, fighting in the Peninsular War, and the scars that marked his face and shoulder bore silent testament to battles survived but never forgotten. The war had hardened him, shaping his once amiable nature into something austere, and his reappearance summoned both curiosity and unease. Women watched him with a mixture of fascination and fear. Men regarded him with wary respect, for no one could predict what the Duke sought or what temper he carried. His northern estate suffered under the weight of post-war economic strain, and pressure from political allies drove him to consider marriage as a strategic necessity rather than a personal desire. The expectation that a duke must secure heirs, stabilize alliances, and navigate the labyrinth of Parliament hung over him like an unavoidable sentence. Sebastian loathed the performative nature of society, the endless smiles concealing ambition, but he understood the stakes too well to refuse their calls. And so, though his steps toward the capital were reluctant, he took them with the grim acceptance of a man accustomed to duty overshadowing inclination. Eleanor's final evening before the assembly unfolded with a quiet mixture of apprehension and resignation. She allowed her maid to fasten her gown, a soft blue silk that flattered her figure without drawing undue attention. She studied herself in the mirror, searching for signs of confidence where doubt lurked instead. She reminded herself that she was not there to dazzle suitors but to secure the fragile future of her family. Still, a faint tremor ran through her when she imagined the ballroom's blazing chandeliers and the dozens of eyes assessing her worth with a single glance. She steadied her breath, knowing retreat was no longer an option. Across the city, Sebastian donned his formal attire with the precision of a man preparing for battle rather than festivity. His valet adjusted his coat and cravat while he stared out the window at the fog drifting over the streets, feeling the familiar tightness in his chest that accompanied gatherings he could neither avoid nor endure with ease. He had survived artillery fire and the chaos of retreat, Yet the looming prospect of social scrutiny unsettled him more than he cared to admit. As night descended upon London, two carriages prepared to depart from different corners of the city, each bearing a passenger burdened by expectation and unaware that their paths would soon converge in a moment that would alter the trajectory of both their lives. The assembly awaited them with its glittering chandeliers, swirling music, and ruthless undercurrent of ambition. Eleanor, clutching her shawl tightly, closed her eyes and breathed deeply as her carriage jolted forward. Sebastian, seated in rigid uncertainty, let his gloved hands rest stiffly on his knees as the horses began their steady trot. Neither knew the other's name, nor imagined how profoundly their fates would entwine before the night was done. Yet the city, with all its glitter and cruelty, seemed to sense the gathering spark, whispering through lamplit streets as though preparing to witness a collision overdue. In that quiet between departure and arrival, Eleanor steadied her breath and resolved to endure whatever awaited her. She felt the weight of every expectation pressing upon her, yet beneath that heaviness flickered a fragile hope she scarcely recognized, a hope that night might offer more than scrutiny and disappointment, that some unexpected turn might shift the course of her quiet life and awaken a future she had never dared imagine. The ballroom at Grosvenor Square shimmered beneath 1,000 candles, the gilded walls reflecting the restless pulse of a society eager to judge, gossip, and devour whatever novelty the evening offered. Eleanor stepped through the entrance on her aunt's arm, her posture poised though her stomach tightened with every glance cast in her direction. The hush that often followed her arrival emerged again, soft, barely perceptible, yet unmistakable in its cruelty. A pair of young women near the staircase tilted their heads together, whispering with the satisfaction of vultures discovering an old carcass. Eleanor felt the heat crawl up her neck but forced herself forward, reminding her trembling heart that she had survived sharper cuts than whispered disdain. She moved into the candlelight with the dignity of a woman determined not to surrender her peace to petty observers. Music swelled from the musicians' dais, a grand waltz wound with delicate flutes and commanding violins, and couples spiraled across the polished floor in a flurry of silks and lace. Eleanor occupied her place near a column, watching the dancers with a bittersweet composure. She remembered an earlier season with its naive hopes, when she had believed herself worthy of attention beyond polite obligation. That girl had vanished, replaced by a woman who knew the world's tendency to overlook anything that did not glitter irresistibly. Still, she observed with a quiet appreciation, granting herself the luxury of admiration even if she was never invited to partake. The ballroom's atmosphere shifted abruptly, like a tide pulling back before a storm breaks. Conversations fell to murmurs, and fans paused mid-flutter. Eleanor followed the direction of the collective gaze and felt her breath still. The Duke of Ravenshire had entered. His presence carved a path through the crowd without effort, for he neither sought attention nor acknowledged it. The ton reacted instinctively to the gravity he carried. He moved with the rigid discipline of a soldier, his broad shoulders impossibly straight beneath the stark lines of his evening coat. A thin scar traced from temple to jaw, a pale echo of battles endured, and though his expression remained impassive, an aura of tension clung to him like a shadow. Eleanor had heard countless stories about him: the war hero who avoided London, the duke who dismissed suitors for alliances, the man rumored to possess a temper sharp enough to cut through steel. Yet seeing him in person unsettled her more than any rumor. His gaze swept the room with cool assessment, lingering on nothing and no one, as though searching for a purpose forgotten. When his eyes passed over her, she felt an inexplicable flicker of awareness, a moment so brief she questioned whether she imagined it. The crowd's whispering resumed, louder than before, emboldened by proximity to scandalous intrigue. A cluster of matrons near Eleanor exchanged sly smiles. One, emboldened by the intimacy of gossip, murmured loudly enough for others to hear, "Imagine being her age and still attending assemblies. Desperation makes ghosts of proud women." Laughter fluttered around them like poisonous lace. Eleanor stiffened, her chin lifting in instinctive defense, but she kept her expression smooth. She had learned long ago that wounded pride only fed their appetites. What she did not know, what no one anticipated, was that the Duke heard. His stride, purposeful and unbroken, faltered for the briefest moment. His eyes sliced toward the source of the cruelty, then to the woman crushed beneath it. Eleanor's composure sparked an unexpected interest in him. She bore the insult with a steadiness he recognized from soldiers who endured suffering with silent dignity. Something stirred within him, a sharp and unfamiliar protectiveness he could neither explain nor ignore. Without considering the consequences, Sebastian altered his direction. The crowd parted subconsciously before him, as though they sensed the shift in his intent. Eleanor, startled to find his imposing form approaching, felt her heartbeat climb painfully quick. When he stopped directly before her, she inhaled sharply, certain he must have mistaken her for someone else. Yet his eyes, storm-gray and unwavering, fixed on hers with disarming clarity. "Lady Eleanor Ashcombe," he said, his deep voice carrying a resonance that seemed to quiet the entire room. She nodded, astonished he knew her name. He extended his gloved hand in an act so conspicuous that the ballroom froze in collective astonishment. Eleanor stared at the hand, then at the man whose reputation suggested he offered nothing lightly. Before she could shape a question, he leaned closer, his tone lowering to an intimate command meant solely for her. "You're mine." A gasp rippled through the assembly. Conversations ruptured into frantic whispers as though the declaration were a pebble dropped into a still pond, sending spreading circles of shock. Eleanor's pulse thundered. She knew the implications. In a ballroom, before witnesses of rank and influence, such a claim bordered on a public proposal. Her reputation, for better or worse, had just been bound to his in a manner society would never ignore. "What are you doing?" she whispered, her breath unsteady. "Correcting an offense," he replied, "and perhaps securing what I require." His honesty held no malice, only blunt resolve. He escorted her away from the column and through a tapestry-curtained arch leading to a quieter gallery. There, beneath the muted glow of wall sconces, Eleanor found her voice again. "You cannot simply lay claim to a woman you have never spoken to." "You're right," he said, surprising her with the concession. "But I can choose a woman whose strength reveals itself before she speaks a word." His gaze softened just enough for her to see an underlying fatigue, the kind born not from weariness but from long isolation. "I have use for sincerity, not pretense. You possess the former." She wanted to dismiss his words, to accuse him of seeking convenience or spectacle, but something about his candor disarmed her. "What exactly is it you mean to secure?" "A marriage that serves us both," he answered. "Your dignity. My stability." Her breath faltered again, this time from disbelief rather than fear. "You know nothing of me. I know you face mockery with grace. I know you stand alone in a room built to judge you. And I know I trust your quiet far more than I trust another's charm." The sincerity of his reasoning unsettled her more than arrogance would have. Her world, long resigned to dwindling horizons, suddenly tilted. She imagined her mother safe, her estate spared, her life expanded rather than diminished. Yet marriage to a man like him, grim, wounded, commanding, held dangers she could not yet name. "We would need terms," she said carefully. "Then let us discuss them," he replied, extending his hand once more. The murmurs from the ballroom seeped into the gallery like an impatient tide, signaling that their moment of privacy could not last. Eleanor looked at Sebastian's hand, then into the steady, war-marked eyes of the man who had thrown his reputation into the fire to shield hers. Whatever future awaited them had already begun to unfurl. She placed her hand in his, and the world outside erupted anew. Ravenshire rose from the northern cliffs like a fortress carved from brooding stone, its towering battlements shrouded in mist as Eleanor approached for the first time as Duchess. The carriage wheels crunched over frost-hardened earth, and the raw wind swept across the moors with a lamenting howl, as though the land itself sensed the new pair who came burdened with unspoken fears and precarious hopes. She watched the landscape unfold with a mixture of awe and unease. Ravenshire was beautiful, but in the wild, untamed manner of something that demanded courage rather than admiration. Sebastian, seated opposite her, remained unreadable, his gaze fixed on the distant hills as if measuring the weight of responsibilities that waited atop them. His silence did not feel hostile. Rather, it felt like the silence of a man accustomed to occupying the vast interior spaces of his own mind. When the carriage halted before the castle's great doors, a line of servants assembled with meticulous formality. Their expressions flickered with curiosity, apprehension, and in some cases open skepticism. Eleanor sensed immediately that her arrival had thrown the household into uncertain territory. A new duchess, selected with startling swiftness and minimal explanation, offered fertile ground for speculation. Yet she stepped forward with steady composure, greeting each servant by name as Sebastian introduced them. The surprise in their eyes warmed her with cautious satisfaction. She would have to earn their respect, but she would not shrink from the challenge. Inside, the castle's vast interior revealed a world of cold grandeur. Tapestries depicting ancient battles hung beside portraits of stern ancestors, and the air carried a faint chill that lingered despite the massive hearths. Eleanor felt dwarfed by the scale of it all. Her previous life had confined her to gentle domestic spaces. This castle radiated the weight of centuries and demanded a strength she feared she might not yet possess. Sebastian watched her survey the hall. There was no mockery in his expression, only a kind of quiet vigilance, as though he studied the interplay between her fear and resolve. In the days that followed, Eleanor made a routine of walking through the estate, meeting tenants and listening to the concerns left neglected during Sebastian's years abroad. The land had suffered, fields underproduced, homes deteriorated, wages fell behind, but she sensed resilience still thrummed beneath the hardship. She offered small gestures where she could, arranging for repairs, distributing food, speaking with families whose loved ones had been wounded in the war. Though surprised by her attention, the tenants gradually began to view her with tentative trust. News traveled quickly across Ravenshire. The new duchess was not a mere ornament but a woman determined to mend what had frayed. Sebastian observed her efforts from a distance at first, reluctant to intrude upon her approach. Yet he could not deny the way her presence eased tensions he had long believed immovable. He accompanied her on several walks, though he seldom spoke unless necessary. She had expected aloofness, but not the peculiar gentleness that emerged in fleeting moments. When he lifted a child whose leg had been crushed in battle work, when he reassured a farmer whose crops had failed, when he listened, deeply and without pretense, to a war widow who feared losing her home. Eleanor began to glimpse the man beneath the hardened exterior, the one shaped not by arrogance but by the relentless erosion of war and responsibility. Their marriage, though still formal and carefully distanced, softened in increments so subtle neither recognized the transformation until it had already taken root. Evenings often found them in the library, she reading near the hearth while he sifted through estate ledgers. Sometimes he would pause and ask her opinion, and she, startled but pleased, offered suggestions that he weighed with sincere consideration. At times, silence stretched comfortably between them, no longer the tense gulf that had dominated their early days. When she laughed, softly, unexpectedly, he would glance up with something like wonder, as though unsure how such warmth had found its way into his austere world. Yet peace, fragile and still forming, rarely survives unchallenged. The first blow arrived in the form of a sealed letter bearing the crest of a London ally turned adversary. Sebastian read its contents with a tightening jaw. A rumor had begun circulating in Parliament that Eleanor had schemed to entrap him into marriage, exploiting his vulnerabilities upon his return from war. The claim was insidious precisely because it preyed on the uncertainty surrounding their abrupt betrothal. If the slander gained momentum, Sebastian could be pressured into seeking a formal separation, an act requiring parliamentary intervention and carrying catastrophic consequences for Eleanor's reputation. When he told her, she listened with a stillness that frightened him. Not because she appeared defeated, but because she appeared prepared. "Of course they would think that," she murmured. "A woman my age, suddenly chosen by a duke, they need a scandal to make it sensible." Her composure unsettled him more than panic would have. He stepped toward her, his voice a low, rough confession. "I will not allow them to harm you." She searched his face, seeking the conviction beneath the words. "Even if it costs you politically?" His answer was immediate. Yes. The force behind that single word stunned her. It peeled back the remaining armor around her heart, revealing the dangerous possibility that their union had grown into something more than strategic necessity. For a moment neither spoke, the air between them charged with emotions neither dared name. In the days that followed, the rumors swelled. Newspapers hinted at hasty alliances, and Parliament murmured about unsteady leadership. Sebastian confronted the threat head-on, delivering a public declaration that Eleanor had been chosen not for advantage but for integrity, and that any man who questioned her character insulted him as well. His defense was fierce, unwavering, and far more revealing than he intended. Eleanor read the transcript with trembling hands, understanding that he had risked far more than reputation. He had risked the isolation he clung to so rigidly, exposing his loyalty for all to see. That night, she sought him in the library, her heart pounding with the weight of what she now knew. He looked up as she entered, and for a moment the world narrowed to the space between them. She stepped closer, her voice soft yet firm. "You defended me as though I mattered to you." "You do," he replied, the truth settling between them with the force of a vow. Something in her steadiness broke then, not in weakness, but in surrender to a truth she had long feared to claim. "And you matter to me," she whispered. Their confessions, spoken in the quiet of a castle built for warriors, forged the turning point their hearts had been circling since the night in Grosvenor Square. Though challenges still loomed, they faced them no longer as strangers bound by necessity, but as partners, two souls shaped by solitude, meeting at last in a union neither expected but both now fiercely chose. Outside, the wind swept across the moors with a wilder, brighter song, as though the land itself recognized a long-awaited shift. The weeks that followed their quiet confessions unfolded with a tenderness neither Sebastian nor Eleanor had ever expected to claim, yet shadows persisted at the edges of their newfound harmony, as though testing the resilience of what had begun to bloom between them. Ravenshire, still recovering from years of neglect, demanded constant attention, and Eleanor threw herself into its restoration with a devotion that astonished the tenants and gradually softened even the most skeptical among the staff. Each morning she walked the grounds beside Sebastian, their discussions weaving between estate matters and fragments of personal history shared with increasing trust. Though their steps aligned naturally, a delicate uncertainty still threaded their every exchange, as if both feared that naming emotion too boldly might fracture what had grown so steadily. One mist-drenched morning, as they approached the cliffs overlooking the restless sea, Eleanor noticed the tense cast of Sebastian's features. His shoulders, usually held with soldierly precision, sagged ever so slightly beneath the weight of unspoken thoughts. She paused, letting the wind tug at her skirts while he remained fixed on the horizon. "Something troubles you," she said gently, unwilling to let silence obscure whatever burden he refused to voice. He inhaled sharply, his brow furrowing as though bracing for impact. "Parliament will convene earlier than expected. My enemies are circling with renewed vigor after the statement I made on your behalf. They intend to question my leadership and use our marriage to fuel their arguments. If they succeed, they may attempt to strip influence from Ravenshire's seat." His voice bore no fear for himself, only for the consequences that might reach her. Eleanor stepped closer, her hand brushing his. "If they mean to tarnish anyone, let them," she said, though her steady tone masked a flicker of apprehension. "We will face whatever comes. Together." The word "together" lingered between them, binding and fragile. Sebastian turned toward her fully, the rawness in his gaze startling her. "I swore I would protect you. I will not allow our marriage to be used as a weapon against you." Her breath caught. "What do you propose to do?" Before he could answer, the clatter of hurried footsteps approached from behind. A footman, breathless and pale, bowed hastily. "Your Graces, a messenger from London. The matter is urgent." He extended a sealed parchment, the wax stamped with the crest of an influential political rival whose malice had long simmered beneath cordial masks. Sebastian's jaw tightened as he broke the seal. Eleanor watched the color drain from his face. "They intend to summon a formal inquiry," he said. "They will suggest that our marriage was not merely hasty, but compromised by coercion." His voice dropped to a low whisper. "They mean to force an annulment." The word struck Eleanor like a blow. Not because she feared disgrace, but because the thought of losing the fragile, burgeoning bond between them threatened to unravel the security she had finally allowed herself to feel. She steadied herself, drawing in a breath that tasted of sea salt and resolve. "They cannot succeed unless you permit them." Sebastian looked at her with an expression she could not immediately decipher. Part anguish, part admiration, and part something dangerously close to adoration. "Eleanor," he murmured, "you deserve a peace I cannot guarantee. I would rather step away from Parliament entirely than allow them to treat you as a vulnerability to exploit." She shook her head, refusing the implication with quiet force. "You are not stepping away. I refuse to let them undo everything you have fought for. And if they wish to examine the truth of our marriage, then let them see it, fully." He frowned slightly. "What truth do you speak of?" "That we stand united," she replied, feeling the certainty settle through her like solid ground beneath shifting earth. Not as convenience. Not as strategy. As husband and wife. Something within him fractured then, not into weakness, but into profound clarity. He reached for her hand with a gentleness at odds with the fierce reputation that had shielded him for years. "You astonish me," he whispered. "From the moment I saw you in that ballroom, you met cruelty with a strength I did not expect to find in anyone, least of all myself." Before he could say more, a distant shout carried on the wind. Another servant came running from the direction of the stables, waving frantically. "Your Graces! Riders from London, official envoys. They have reached the village and are expected at the castle before nightfall." Eleanor and Sebastian exchanged a glance, one filled with urgency, but also an unspoken agreement. They would face this challenge side by side. Back at the castle, preparations unfolded swiftly. The great hall was readied for the envoys, though tension thrummed through the household like an invisible thread. Eleanor dressed deliberately, choosing a gown of deep green that complemented her steady composure rather than attempting to dazzle. She wished to face the envoys as herself, not as a constructed image crafted for their judgment. Sebastian emerged from his chambers dressed in formal attire befitting a duke prepared for battle rather than diplomacy. Yet when he joined her in the corridor, he paused, his gaze softening. "You look as though you were born to stand before them," he said. She smiled faintly. "And you look as though you intend to knock down anyone who questions me." "I do," he replied simply. When the envoys arrived, their expressions carried the unmistakable blend of curiosity and condescension wielded by men accustomed to bending others to their will. They presented documents outlining accusations, masked beneath the veneer of political concern. Eleanor listened as Sebastian addressed each claim with unflinching poise, his voice resonating through the hall with the authority of a man who would not permit another soul to dictate the fate of his marriage. Yet at a certain point, Eleanor stepped forward, surprising even herself. "If you wish to question the integrity of our union," she said, her tone calm but commanding, "then question me directly. I will answer whatever you seek to twist." The envoys exchanged startled glances, unprepared for the Duchess's intervention. They asked their intrusive questions: why she had accepted the Duke so quickly, whether she had acted from desperation, whether she understood the political implications of her position. Eleanor met each inquiry with composure sharpened by years of enduring far subtler cruelty. She spoke honestly, about her mother, her estate, her lack of expectation, and the startling sincerity with which Sebastian had approached her. There were no theatrics, no embellishments. Only truth delivered with the quiet dignity of a woman who refused to cower. By the end of the interview, the envoys found themselves disarmed. Their accusations crumbled beneath the weight of her unvarnished strength. As they departed, clearly unsettled, Sebastian turned to her with an emotion too full to hide. "You fought for us," he murmured. She met his gaze with equal intensity. "As you fought for me." In that moment, the last barrier between them dissolved. Whatever began as a strategic alliance had transformed into a bond of fierce loyalty and burgeoning love. They stood together in the now quiet hall, exchanging a look that acknowledged not only the struggle they had endured, but the future they now intended to shape hand in hand. Outside, as night settled softly across Ravenshire, the castle no longer felt like a fortress of stone. It felt like a place where something new, stronger than expectation, deeper than obligation, had finally taken root.